What's going on, you guys? So I wanted to talk to you about something that I installed on the Mustang last year, and it was a pretty cool product that I actually put on here, and what it was the PDM. Now you might be wondering, what is a PDM? Do I need one? And should I get one? Is it worth the cost? How much do they cost? So in this video, we're going to go ahead, cover that. I'm going to run you through kind of like what a PDM does, how it works, just kind of dumb it down for you, make it super simple to understand, and answer the question, do you actually need one, and is it worth buying for your project? Alright, so you might be wondering, what is a PDM? What does it do? Well, PDM stands for Power Distribution Module. So what that does is it takes CAN bus data, and it does exactly what it sounds like the title says. It distributes power to everything in your car. So ignition coil power, fuel injector power, headlights, taillights. Hey, maybe you want to go ahead and program some party mode flashlights on your car. You can program that through a PDM as well. Now the PDM takes all of its data input over CAN bus communication. So on a vehicle like this, where you're running a dash system, that is CAN bus, or the Whalley system, that is CAN bus, or the keypad, that is also CAN bus. Everything is all data input over CAN bus. So everything is programmable, and another big benefit to a PDM is that you no longer have to worry about fuses or relays for turning anything on. Everything is all solid state controlled through the PDM. You can set amperage limitations for everything. Say you want your fuel pump set for 15 amp, you can have them set at 15 amp, and if they go over that, it'll automatically fault that system and shut it down. Now you can program inrush current for those circuits as well. For example, radiator fans. When you turn a radiator fan on, you have a sudden spike in amperage that is higher than the standard running rate on those fans. So say your standard running rate on those fans is 30 amps, but when you turn them on, there's an inrush current of 60 amps. You can pre-program it to see that 60 amps for, I think, up to 3 seconds before it'll actually show a fault. And then after it comes back down and sets at that regular amperage rating, you're good to go. You don't have to worry about any fuses or relays for any of this stuff. So it makes wiring a lot simpler. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to explain this just a little bit simpler. So the PDM, which is right here, basically, this does output control. Now, that does have inputs on it. Say you want to trigger something by an input switch, for example, a ground trigger off my brake pedal here, or a potentiometer. Like say I want to run a 5-volt sensor input off of like a transducer for brake pressure. I can run a brake pressure sensor onto my master cylinder that'll actually detect how much brake pressure I'm actually pushing on there. Now I can use that for data. I can take that signal, input it into the Whalley, and then since the Whalley is connected over CAN bus to the dash, the PDM, and the keypad, it shares that data with everything. So I can program the PDM to see that sensor data and say, as soon as it sees a voltage spike, it'll know that there's pressure being applied, and it can turn the brake lights on. So I'm not only getting pressure data for the ECU, but I can use it as a triggered switch for my brake lights. Alright, so I'm in the middle of editing this video and kind of realized I went off on a bit of a tangent there and got a little off topic. I started off talking about how it had inputs and outputs, and then totally neglected to talk about the actual inputs that the PDM has. Now what I'm running is a PMU16, and it has 16 input circuits to the PDM. Now those inputs can be voltage or they can be ground triggers. So say, like I was stating before, you just want to have an input from a ground trigger brake switch, you can input that wire directly into one of the PDM inputs and have that perform a function of an output from the PDM. No relays, fuses in between. Also, you can use it for additional sensor input. So say you can communicate your PDM to your engine management system. You could have a 0 to 5 volt, 0 to 12 volt sensor, feed voltage to one of those inputs, and you can program that input to be whatever voltage X is will perform X function or do X readout on your dash. So you can use it as inputs and outputs. Now the PMU16 that I'm running has 16 total inputs, 10 25 amp circuit outputs, 6 15 amp outputs, one 5 volt output, And then it also has 2 CAN circuit outputs, so 2 CAN highs and 2 CAN lows. And then the big wire you see on the top of the PDM is the actual power feed source to the PDM, which draws the power to send to everything else. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit and makes it a little simpler to understand. So back to the video. It's very similar with like fuel pump control. Say I want to run my fuel pumps in stages. So when I turn the ignition on, the one main pump comes on. I have a lift pump and a feed pump. So both those pumps come on, they prime the system. Now all the fuel pump controlling is done through the PDM. I have it programmed to see this trigger input, and it knows to prime the system for 5-6 seconds. And then as soon as I start the motor, it takes data from the Hall tech and then starts controlling everything else required to run the motor. So staged fuel pumps, for example, would be under normal running conditions, it runs the lift pump, the feed pump, and then as soon as it goes over 3 pounds of boost, it turns on the secondary. And that secondary pump that I have is actually more than enough to run this through the power band right now, so I'm not even using my third backup pump. But with a PDM, this is what's pretty trick. I can set the PDM up so that if it sees a fuel pressure delta drop off below a certain amount, it'll kick that third on. Or for example, it starts seeing one of the other 2 fuel pumps run out of its normal amperage window. Like say it sees pump 1 run below 5 amps or go over amperage. It can kind of you can kind of get an idea that that pump might be starting to die. So what it'll do, it'll switch pumps 3 and 1 or pump 3 and 2. So it can all do that by itself over programming, which is a really cool trick that you can do with a PDM that you can't really do with relays and switches. Not to mention, one of the biggest benefits is wiring time. Like if I was to build a customer's car, I would try to sell them on a PDM. Even though it's more expensive, the amount of time saved in labor for having to wire an entire chassis up is so much faster with a PDM than having to wire each individual relay for each individual circuit. You don't have to do any of that with a PDM, it's all built directly into it. So CAN bus communication is a big deal when doing something like this. It was kind of one of the main reasons why I decided to go over to a PDM in the first place. I had the Hall tech, it does CAN bus. I had the AEM dash, it does CAN bus. So then I was like, I want to get a nice CAN bus switch pad like I have here, and a PDM only made sense to go that route. And this has 15 switches on it, and each switch can do 3 functions, and it's 4 wires. 4 wires total. You have a power, a ground, a CAN high, CAN low. Same thing with this, power, ground, CAN high, CAN low. I have a 4-wire harness that comes out of the keypad and goes down to the CAN bus distribution module. Same thing with this, it's just a 4-wire harness that plugs directly in, and then the Hall tech has a CAN bus jumper that plugs in, and the PDM has a CAN bus jumper that jumps in, and they all just talk to each other. The only thing you have to do is go in and figure out the programming. It is nice to be able to set things up though, like to get in this car and go. Normally with a car that you have a bunch of relays and switches and stuff like that, you'll have to turn on your fuel pumps or turn on your fans, or you have a relay for each one of those things. Well, with this, with the way it's set up, all I have to do is turn the key on, turn on the ignition, and then hit the starter. And I don't even need to hold the button, because with CAN bus and the PDM, you can actually program it so that when you just tap this button, it'll just keep cranking over for however many seconds you want to set it for, or until it sees an RPM signal, and then it'll disengage the starter. Unless the battery's dead. And another nice thing about this PDM setup is that on the actual PDM module that I have right here, I have this within my view right here, and it actually has an LED for each circuit, and it'll light up whenever each circuit is active, so you know which circuits are active at the time of what you're running. And if there's an issue with the circuit, it'll actually light up red. So if there's a short, or it's overdrawing too much amperage, or outside of an amperage window that you have set up, it'll actually light it up red and shut off. Now it will automatically retry 3 times until it permanently cuts that circuit off, but it does make diagnosing things a lot easier, because the way the circuit's set up, you're basically sending power directly out of the PDM directly to whatever you're powering. So for example, it's coming right out of you have 1 wire out of the PDM directly to the fuel pump. So if that's shorting out somewhere, you have 1 wire to trace. You don't have to go back through and check terminals for each end of a fuse or each pin on a relay. It just makes things a lot easier. So that's the basic premise of what a PDM does. It is a no fuse, no relay power distribution module to power pretty much anything and everything in your car. Now, the circuit sizes are not unlimited. You are limited to a certain amount of amperage and a certain amount of circuits. Some of them are high output, some of them are low output. So, for example, some of the circuits are limited to 25 amp, other ones are limited to 15. But say you need 30, you can bridge two 15 amp circuits together to get 30. Or if you need 50, you can take two 25s, bridge them together to get that 50 amps you need. Now, depending on what PDM you buy, they're going to either cost within the lower thousands of dollars to tens of thousands of dollars. The one that I have is an ECU Masters PMU16, and that was about $1,300. And honestly, it was well worth the $1,300 for the amount of time and headaches it saves with wiring alone. Not to mention the programmability and all the things you can change on the fly without having to go through and rewire and change relays and switches and all that stuff around. CAN bus communication between everything is super awesome. Good key feature to have. Now, there are other brands out there like Motec, Race Pack. Haltech is even coming out with one this year, I believe, and it's supposed to be competitively priced for the PMU16. So I'm probably going to be switching over to a Haltech, not eliminating the one I have completely, but I'm just going to take that one and put it into the back, let it power some stuff that I have in the back. As for price point, they're around $1,300 on the cheaper side, but for what you get, it's well worth it in my opinion. So if you're building like an actual full-blown race car, and stuff like being able to work on it super easy, being able to quickly diagnose problems, make changes on the fly with a couple clicks of a keyboard, stuff like that's important to you, then I would highly recommend getting a PDM. It's worth the money. But if this is like your street car, you don't really work on it that often, you kind of are on a super tight budget, and you know your money is more important to you to put towards other things than your time of actually like wiring a chassis up, then it's not a necessity. You don't need it 100%, but damn, is it a really nice tool to have available. Anyways, I hope this might have been a little bit informative. If somebody was in the market and looking to get into a PDM, not really 100% sure what they were, it's kind of what they do. So anyways, that's going to be it for this one. So like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel if you're new, follow the build along, and until the next one, I'll catch you guys later.